Let's say the stock market falls 40 to 50% in the next year or two. This is a great question. And he's posing it like, well, let's see it, say that happens. There are a lot of people out there who are insistent that we're looking at that like equities are coming off 40 to 60%. I don't know if that's going to happen or not, but the question is, would that not likely take Bitcoin to something that's even hard to imagine at the moment? Do you have any thoughts on that? And I do. This current drawdown, we're seeing S&P 500 off 25%. In 2018, the S&P 500, it came off 20%. And why the S&P 500 was off 20%, we saw Bitcoin off 85%. This time around, we see the S&P 500 in a greater correction, 5% greater, and we see Bitcoin with 10% less of a correction. It's off 75%. If we saw the equity markets continue to, let's call it really correct. I want to call it a crash. If they come off 40, 50%, let's go down, just start at 40%, right? That seems to be the base case, actually, of a lot of investment banks out there. A lot of investment banks are saying that the recession will end when S&P 500 is trading around $3,000. Is it possible that we're going to see, not only the equity markets correct further, what's that going to do to Bitcoin? And specifically, what type of levels might that bring Bitcoin down to? Because Bitcoins are off 75%. We know an 85% correction is, let's call it $10,000. It might be like 10,800 or something like that, but let's just say $10,000. Now, if you're saying that Bitcoin has a good chance of bottoming out somewhere around $14,000 to $16,000, I would give that a significant probability that that could happen for sure. But $10,000, another 85% drawdown off the top without experiencing that type of blow off top. Well, the macro is different in so much that, the Fed is tightening into a slower economy. That it could happen. I would not say that probability is zero, but I would say let's call it something lighter. Could it come off much more than that? Could we see something like, Bitcoin $5,000 or $7,000? So the part that I have trouble with when we talk about Bitcoin coming down below $10,000 is this, and I'm looking at this from a very simplistic viewpoint, but I like to look at things from that type of lens. I like to simplify them down as easy as possible. So the way that I look at it, we got to understand the difference. Bitcoin, when it was trading at $50,000, it might have been like $52,000. Bank of America at that point, it estimated that it took $93 million to move Bitcoin 1%. The basic math was that it takes, therefore, $1 billion to move Bitcoin's price 10%. That was with Bitcoin trading. It's Bitcoin $50,000. I think it's $52,000 or whatever. Let's just say it's $50,000. Keep the math very easy, very simple. And that $1 billion moves Bitcoin's price 10%. So let's say price goes down to $10,000. So at that point, $1 billion would move the price of Bitcoin 50%. Yeah, again, this is my simplistic view. If anyone really has any, contrary opinion or insight into that, I'm all about it. Not only that, I embrace it. I always want to know more than ever, anytime that I might be wrong. But the way that I see it is that it would take $1 billion to move Bitcoin's price 50%. Now, forget me, forget you, and forget like everyone else out there who is like right now, there's a lot of Bitcoiners out there. Like I'm talking about the Bitcoiners, and they're actually dreaming about price going to $10,000 because they know that they will go ahead and deploy that capital. And there are a lot of Bitcoiners who have been actually building reserves since January. There are some Bitcoiners also who took profits as late as like $27,000, maybe 20% of their portfolio, and are just waiting in case that happens. They're already so well positioned, 80% of their net worth into Bitcoin. If Bitcoin goes up to a half $500 million, they're set. And if Bitcoin goes down to $10,000, then they're going all in. So forget just like the regular people, me, you, and everyone else. The truth is, and it's, there's a little bit of perspective that perhaps and potentially that what has happened is that this severe, obnoxious, relentless downselling actually has a lot to do with institutions. Contrary to popular belief, they're not so good at timing the markets. And they actually have to keep rebalancing their portfolio, so they have no choice. But instead of waiting like retail can for perhaps even some type of rally to set into, they have to actually just sell, and that might have caused this type of relentless down move. But there is big money, serious money that has entered the space over the last 2 years. There's also a lot of big money and serious money who is watching the space and waiting for their entry. I personally don't see Bitcoin able. Most of the liquidations, in my view, would be happening in an area, let's call it between like 18,000 and 14,000, right? And it's possible that that even caused price to go down further towards that, 13, 12, 11, 10. But I don't think that there are any liquidations. I know, and supposedly from his mouth, that Michael Saylor's liquidation level is at 3,000, and even then he wouldn't be liquidated. But I assume that most liquidations across the bulk of the market are between like 18, or the ones left are between like 18 and 14,000. If price took out those liquidations and even there was like some forced selling that took price lower, I can't see Bitcoin staying much lower than that 14,000 for too long. And even coming into that 10,000, $1 billion, while a lot of money, is also not a lot of money. And you would see Bitcoin, I think, bought up and snap up rightly quick. That's my feelings on that. And that's why it's fair to say that equity markets for sure would pressure Bitcoin down further. And if we're going to see equity markets really come off, and I only showed over here 37%, right? They could come off 50 or 60% and everything's on the table. I do foresee that Bitcoin would be under pressure, but because of the size of Bitcoin's market and because of the players involved now, it is much bigger than it was. It's significantly bigger than it was in 2018 by magnitudes. What's the market cap right now? It must be something like $400 billion or $450 billion. It has to be close to that. And if price were to come down to a $200 billion market cap, I think that it's a very small market. It's not like the equity markets that are sizable, substantial, where a little bit of money doesn't have the same effect. So I think a little bit of money at that point into Bitcoin, you would see that's where Bitcoin would disconnect from the traditional markets. And it's because of the size of the market. That's a tiny, tiny market. A $1 trillion market is a tiny market. A $200 billion market is very, very tiny. And I think there's enough interest, enough people who understand the long-term proposition of Bitcoin. I love that even Vadir saying, imposing the question, what happens to Bitcoin if it comes off 40, 50%? Jim pointing out, under this current world that we're in right now, we could see some extraordinary low Bitcoin prices. We already have too. I mean, it's fair to say Bitcoin taking out the previous all-time cycle high is already us seeing some extraordinary prices, as well as maybe Bitcoin was capped cycle peak over here because of that evolving and changing macro. Yeah, and that's not to say that we can't go significantly lower. We can. Of course we can. Love to hear that might offer the opportunity for someone to become a whole coiner. And they know, either way, possibly by the end of the year, they're going to be there regardless. I love how Vadir also mentioned that he knows that regardless, CTM gives us the opportunity, regardless of what's happening, to continue to be it's beautiful.